So good afternoon and welcome to Virtual Insights, Nina Katchadourian and Neil Goldberg on photography and portraiture. Thank you all so much for joining us for what promises to be a really insightful and fun conversation. My name's Persephone Allen and I'm the manager of adult public programs at the American Folk Art Museum in New York City. As many of you know, our museum is dedicated to expanding the appreciation and understanding of self-taught art across time and place. And this year we celebrate 6 decades of this work with our institution's 60th anniversary. Today's conversation is inspired by our current exhibition, Photo BRUT collection Bruno Descharmes and Company, which brings together more than 400 photographs by 40 self-taught artists that present radically different ways of seeing and being seen. And you can now see this exhibition at our galleries in Manhattan and of course purchase the catalog online. We are grateful for opportunities like this to connect online, which would not be possible without your support. Thank you. Know that if you enjoy today's program, you can donate to sustain ongoing experiences like this one, our 60th milestone, and all of the other incredible events we had this spring. As we tune in from our homes this afternoon, we want to begin by acknowledging that our museum stands upon the unceded traditional homeland of the Lenape Delaware peoples, and we honor members of this nation, past, present, and future. We also grieve the violence in Atlanta this week and stand in solidarity with Asian, Asian American, and Pacific Islander communities across this country and internationally. Today's conversation is being recorded and closed captioning in English can be activated by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We'll begin today with brief introductions, followed by presentations and a conversation before closing with Q&A. We invite you to share questions for Nina and Neil throughout the program by using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screens, and we'll respond to as many of these as possible at the end. Today, we explore questions of practice, documentation, finding material amidst the everyday, and taking expansive and exploratory approaches to photography. As art historian Michelle Tevos observes in the exhibition catalog, artists in Photo BRUT use the camera to play against type by making their daily life an unreality. We are honored to be joined by brilliant artists and thinkers, Nina Katchadourian and Neil Goldberg, whose work invites us to see the everyday, our world, our reality, and ourselves in new and unexpected ways. It's my pleasure to introduce them both today. Nina Katchadourian is an interdisciplinary artist whose work includes video, performance, sound, sculpture, photography, and public projects. Her video, Accent Elimination, was included at the 2015 Venice Biennale in the Armenian pavilion, which won the Golden Lion for Best National Participation. In 2016, she created Dust Gathering, an audio tour on the subject of dust for MoMA's Artist Experiment program. And if you haven't listened to this, it's fantastic, and you can all go out and do it later this afternoon. Her work has been exhibited at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Serpentine Gallery, Palais de Tokyo, Istanbul Museum of Art, MoMA PS1, and the list goes on. A traveling solo museum survey of her work entitled Curioser opened in March 2017 at the Blanton Museum of Art and subsequently traveled to the Cantor at Stanford University and the Brigham Young University Museum of Art. Her work has been supported by numerous grants and awards, and she is a professor of practice at NYU Gallatin and represented by Catharine Clark Gallery and Pace Gallery. Neil Goldberg makes video, photo, mixed media, and performance work about embodiment, sensing, mortality, and the everyday. His work has been exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art, the New Museum, the Museum of the City of New York, Hammer Museum, and again, the list goes on. He is a recipient of many, many fellowships, and he teaches at the Yale School of Art and has been resident faculty at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, and is a recent mentor with Queer Art Mentorship. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend his recent op-doc, Hallelujah, Anyway, Anyway, published by the New York Times this week. We are so excited and thrilled and honored to have you both here and share virtual space. And thank you for everyone on the call. We're really excited to hear from you and learn with you today. At this point, I'd like to invite Nina to begin.
Thank you, Persephone. And I'm just super excited to get to do this for you guys and with Neil, who is a dear friend, but we have actually never officially gotten to kind of talk. We have talked a million times unofficially, and I've had Neil come and speak to my classes and things like this, but and we've kept each other a little bit in the dark as to what we're doing specifically today. So he doesn't really know what I'm about to show you, and I don't know really what he's about to show me, but I hope that will lead to a nice kind of spontaneous conversation that will follow our mini presentations. So I will share my screen and begin a bit of show and tell. I thought I would start with a few ruminations because I was thinking while I saw the exhibition in New York about the kind of discourse and vocabulary, even like the sort of specific words that are often used to speak about the artists who are in the show. And it struck me that there's often a kind of narrative about self-taught artists where there's sort of words used about, you know, the urgency they have to make or the compulsion that they feel to make things. And I found myself thinking that, you know, although that may be true in many instances, there's something that feels like right around the corner of those words is something quite kind of negative or dysfunctional, or I just was struck by how much the kind of levity that I sometimes experience in works like the works in the show, and the kind of there's a kind of joy in making that I think for me comes through so much and so often in this exhibition, and that I found myself thinking about a lot when I saw it. So I wanted to put some thought into, maybe focus my part of what I'm going to say today on the sort of joy of making, on the absorption that comes from being really, really involved in the thing that you're doing. And I find intense comfort of being in that headspace and being in that process. So when I saw the show, there were many instances where I found myself thinking, you know, I wish I had done that, or I understand why that person wanted to do that. And in a few cases, I kind of want to go straight home and do that myself. But these are really sort of visceral responses to the things that I saw in view. And I've decided to kind of organize my show and tell around these moments of affinity that I felt, or you could say kind of camaraderie that I felt with some of these artists. So that said, I'll take you through a couple of projects where I felt there was that kind of reverberation. In 2010, I started what has now been a long ongoing project called Seed Assignment. And it began very unintentionally and very spontaneously. And it began on an airplane when I was seated at LaGuardia about to fly to Atlanta. And I found myself with a couple hours of time ahead of me. And I thought, you know, this time kind of already doesn't count. I've already written it off as useless, as uninteresting, as something that like is not worth bothering with. And I thought on the heels of that, that's a terrible attitude, because I am often someone who tries to personally and artistically make the case for, you know, there's more out there that meets the eye, and there actually is a lot of interesting stuff in the world if we just maybe look a little closer or look a little more optimistically. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to try to make stuff the whole way to Atlanta, not really knowing what that would mean, but just I gave myself that assignment. And what I had to work with was, you know, what I had. I had my cell phone, I had the in-flight magazine, I had whatever snacks were passed out and whatever was in the seat pocket and whatever was in my bag. And I got to work, and after I arrived, quite a few things had happened. Enough had happened that I thought, I think I need to keep doing this. And I have kept doing it ever since that time. So in a very whirlwindy kind of way, I'll show you a sampling of images from this project. It's a sprawling project that now, you know, over 10 years of doing this on every flight that I've been on since then, of course, with the exception of this past year, this is tip of the iceberg. But for example, the snacks are passed out, and you can crumble your pretzels and put them on a page from the magazine and make a landslide. Or the pretzel crumbs can also become, this is called Pretzel Meteor, a sort of disaster scene of a meteor that hits the earth, maybe like a science fiction scene, and then this car that just barely gets away. There's a lot of food in these pictures because they never feed you on planes anymore domestically, so I'm always bringing snacks. Here's a giant apple. Here's a picture from the New York Times that shows a dance review, and I put the peanuts on these bent arms to kind of create this feeling of weight. I have a whole subcategory of the project that I call high altitude spirit photography. And in this case, I'm not adding anything to the image. I'm just working with the light that bounces off the shiny magazine page. And here I couldn't resist putting in one image from the show, which is a spirit photograph taken in 1914. And I was sort of doing this when I was planning my slideshow, going, wow, it's weird. They do have this kind of, similarity. You can take a picture in the shiny belt buckle of the person next to you. And I'm often doing this in a kind of spy camera way, taking a picture in my lap. And another subcategory of this project I call proposals for public sculpture, where I'm trying to think about this sort of kind of bombastic sculpture that often appears in front of public buildings. This is a lemon wedge from the drink that was handed out. These are two lifesavers that I sucked down to make into these very, very thin rings. And then I put it on a weird synthetic airplane blanket. In this case, I was eating some green peas as a snack when I flew back one summer from Finland to New York, and I found a picture of Lake Como in the in-flight magazine and added these green peas to it to make a kind of topiary structure. So all of these things are these kinds of improvisations, very spontaneously and on the spot. A teabag string on top of a dog from the Sky Mall catalog, which is this product is meant to help an elderly dog get on the bed. And this picture I was thinking about, I called it Ascension, and I was thinking about these sort of, long-standing religious themes. This is sort of the dog going to heaven, to the great beyond. Fingers look really strange out of context, and I really like using my finger out of context. And so this is called Sick Finger, and this finger is in a surgical theater. And then this is called a sweater gorilla, which is what you can make if you take your sweater and put it in your lap and mold it to appear this way for the camera. And it's important to say that the camera sees things and sort of resolves things in a way that our eye in that moment often cannot. So I'm often trying to really kind of make these pictures through the camera. And did I say this already, that I make this whole project with my cell phone? I might have forgotten to say that, but that's been the rule since the first time I did anything on an airplane. I'm only using my cell phone. So with this as a sort of reminder to address portraits, the sort of portrait of a gorilla, I'll talk about another sub-series of the larger series seat assignment that started, again, very spontaneously. And this took place in the airplane lavatory one day when I went in there and thought, I haven't ever tried to make a costume. Maybe I could use the stuff in here and do that. So I took a tissue paper seat cover and kind of balled it up and put it on my head and took this pose and went back to my seat, looked at the picture and thought, what this sort of reminds me of 15th century Flemish portraiture, like something about the kind of solemnity and stillness and body position. And I don't know why I just made this image, but I think I need to make more of them. So I have been doing that. I did that, I should say, a lot in 2011. I made a whole bunch more of these, most of them made on a very long flight between San Francisco and New Zealand. And the same logic applies. It's what I have and trying to kind of invent and invent and invent again and again. And there's one image from the series that I don't show that often, which I'm going to show you now, which is this one. And the reason I don't show it as often is because of a sort of nerdy art historical thing that bugs me, which is that this really isn't very Flemish. This is more sort of like Spanish Baroque to me, but it doesn't for me sort of fit as much with the other pictures. However, I did find myself thinking about this particular image quite a bit in the exhibition, partially because of Tomasz Maczynski's work and the way that he took up in all kinds of sly and ingenious ways these characters that he is trying to embody and the photos he takes. One of my really favorite ones is the one on the left here where he is dressed as the Pope and has this kind of, knowing finger. There's something about that gesture to me that makes me think he's slightly stifling a giggle, or there's something sort of self-reflexive and knowing about it, which I really, really love. And then, this kind of Mother Teresa image on the right. And like him, I guess I feel this sort of identification with this of like trying to make yourself into something else in this wide-ranging way. He does it even more so, I think, than I do, but sort of fancy people and famous people and non-famous people. And this fancy lady that he makes here reminded me a bit of something. I don't think I've ever shown this picture to anyone really publicly, but in 2003, I was messing around in my studio and I had just seen one of the Matthew Barney Cremaster films. And I sort of decided to try to make this really low-tech Matthew Barney. I think because at the time there was so much discussion about his giant budgets and kind of all the money that he had to work with as an artist. And I decided to try to be a Matthew Barney character using, you know, all kinds of stuff lying around. So this too is a neck pillow and a piece of bubble wrap and a towel. And it's funny to think back on, I sort of only recently made the connection that this is the first time I put anything inflatable on my head. And it was way before the lavatory self-portraits. So this is 2003. And also that year, I had begun making a series of pictures which involved using live caterpillars on my face to construct a kind of mustache. And I made a bunch in this mode. They were all kind of posturing, trying to kind of access a certain kind of, I don't know, iconic masculinity, you could say. And in this case, I thought a lot about this picture of Thomas Machinsky when I saw it. These two images for me kind of went back and forth with one another. I'm trying to be Ernest Shackleton here, where the frostiness of the caterpillar hairs become frostiness. No caterpillars were harmed in the making of these images. I put them back on the tree where they came from after this was over. And the way I kind of got them to stay on my face was by painting a little bit of honey on my upper lip, which sort of slowed them down. But I washed them off afterwards and put them back on their tree. I love this one too. This sort of is, I think of it as his Rasputin image. Here, I'm trying to be a kind of cliche of an artist, kind of a Picasso-esque image. And yeah, and this one of him in this hat. So the number of people in the show who are sort of transforming themselves into other people was something that was really fascinating to me. And one of those, I know why you wanted to do that moments. Another instance of this that I loved was Ichigo Sukino's photos, which he is making using, again, very resourcefully using tape to often kind of change his face along with some basic costuming, but he becomes all kinds of people, and the variety of people that he becomes is something that I found tremendous. Everyone from Phil Collins to Dali to Steve Buscemi, and many, many, many others. This one, Steve Jobs, was particularly, I think, I like this one a lot because there is a kind of low tech meets high tech thing that is happening here. Elke Tangeton has in the exhibition these amazing stitched through images. And I spent a lot of time looking at these and kind of thinking about how her stitching changes the picture. In this case, I looked a lot at the red on one baby, blue on the other, kind of, you know, it felt like, was this a kind of conventional gender coding? Like what was happening here? And how does it change the babies to kind of sew through them? I think it does something different when the image is a religious image like this one. It felt to me almost kind of devotional, and here I couldn't resist sort of pairing these just for a second to kind of see how they spoke to one another. But in both this one, and I'll also let you see hers without my intervention, there was something kind of, yeah, I guess devotional is the word that kept coming to mind about kind of doing this to the picture of the saint, I guess it is. And I also kind of understand the desire to sew through paper. This is a project I've been working on since 2001. I'm getting ready to show this in New York in a show that I have in May at Pace Gallery. I haven't shown this piece since I showed it in New York in 2001 in New York. And the logic here is that I buy regular commercial postcards and then stitch through them with red thread to connect different things in the image. And often by doing so, try to sort of see if I can change a dynamic or a power relationship sometimes in the picture. In this case, I've paired two where these are bats that fly around the certain bridge in Austin, Texas. They fly out from the certain bridge at dusk, and people go there to watch them. And here, the top of that lamppost is connected to all the people in one postcard and to all the bats in the other. I also made one of this river in Austin where a tall tower seems to be sort of controlling all the people in the boats or in these watercraft. And what happens with these then is that I begin to interpolate them into larger groups where there's a similar logic to these kind of lines of control. Then the groups get interpolated into larger clusters, and these clusters into larger clusters. And in the end, this thing becomes a really, really big, sprawling, I think I have 350 postcards in this now, installation that is then, as you can see, kind of connected by these dotted red lines. And this is the whole room. It's a really hard piece to photograph and communicate. So I hope these pictures are doing them some justice. But it takes a really long time to put up, and it swells every year because I keep adding postcards to it. And it's sort of one of these things that I imagine I'm going to be working on my entire life. So then lastly, I wanted to just quickly talk about how much I loved Kazuo Honda's work. These are smoking pipe devices that he has made out of these tightly rolled pieces of magazine paper. And they're just so incredibly constructed and designed. And I also really, really loved his kit that kind of came with these pipe pieces. This is just a picture I took myself looking down on the kit. And I guess I thought back to moments where I've sat and rolled up paper. This is again from seed assignment, bringing it back to the beginning a little bit of, I make these pieces in the drink well called log piles or wood piles, sorry, where I'm trying to kind of build these little stacks neatly, or make these clocks, which to me are sort of the time space of the airplane. And recently I've been sort of thinking maybe this is sort of the time space of the pandemic too, where it's just sometimes really hard to know what time it is, or to know what time zone you're in or time zone someone else is in. So then, you know, there were a lot of questions during the first part of the pandemic that I was getting, maybe Neil was too, about, you know, wow, you know, what are you making during the pandemic? It must be a great time to be making art. And I kind of felt like saying, not really, it's really stressful. It's a pandemic. People are dying. It's a complicated time to be doing anything. But what I found myself really wanting to do was to think about the term art making and kind of separate it into two halves, and to think about the art part, which I just basically decided initially to set aside, not worry about that. But the making parts felt very important. And I just began making things that felt really good to make. And I tried to be very non-judgmental about what those were. And I didn't care about the category they fell into or not. The first thing I decided to make, and I hope this video will play, was a big cardboard cactus made out of old boxes and about 600 toothpicks that I cut and painted white. And then at the tip of this thing, because cacti often get this kind of pinkish tint to those thorns at the top, I painted those on. And this cactus is sitting right behind me right now. You'll notice it maybe when we come back. But there was something so therapeutic about making this object. And you know, there is a certain category of things that I make that are sort of in this vague category of I'm making them because I really need to make them. I really want to make them. A lot of joy comes out of making them. This is the one I'm working on right now, which is like a lot of toilet paper tubes that I've collected through the pandemic that are now, that I have enough of them that I can kind of start to make a cactus that is going to grow out of these things. And then there's kind of one that I haven't finished yet, but it's here next to me. It's a straw, like drinking straw thing that is somehow going to find its way into some kind of a, I don't know, pot. But this is like some strange geometry experiment too. I'm starting to kind of understand how circles combine to be other kinds of things. So, so yeah, I think I'll turn it over to Neil there, but I hope I've put a few things on the table that we can kick around from that point.
Thank you, Nina. Oh, and thank you, Persephone and American Folk Art Museum for having us. But this is such a delight to spend time like this with you, Nina. We'll talk about, well, my fandom for you. And anyhow, I am going to present 1 minute, 30-second overview of a type of portraiture I do that I don't see reflected in the show, just to kind of lay it as a groundwork and have it somewhere in some part of the brain. And this is I find a good way to do this is to just show some excerpts from a piece I did at the Museum of the City of New York. I realize I should reshare. So I'm just going to walk you through this. This is a show I did at the Museum of the City of New York. This is a piece I did called Truck Driver's Elbows. And I guess a lot of my work is interested in these kind of micro portraits. This is another piece, my first ever video piece called She's a Talker. 90 gay men combing their cat and saying she's a talker. It's kind of an oblique way to get at a portrait. We see a little bit of a face, we see a little bit of a living room, we see a cat. These are portraits I did of people who had just missed the subway. It was originally a video project, and these are video stills I found within it when I found that the video itself didn't work. If we move into the main room, there was a piece on the left called Salad Bar, which were the wrapped faces of people deciding, in this, I find, very poignant moment, deciding what to have for lunch. On the right were just a portrait of this lilac blossom and the people who sniffed it over the course of 10 minutes. This is a piece called Surfacing that looks at the faces of people who are orienting themselves as they emerge from this subway. And finally, a couple of pieces from a series called Hallelujah Anyway. On the left, shopkeepers opening their gates in the morning near my former apartment. And on the right, elderly folks pulling themselves up the stairs of a city bus. All of these are instances where these are kind of like, there's a limited amount of information and an ability to project and also something about repetition and series that I think allows for a certain relationship between viewer and artwork that kind of fills in a portrait. Okay, that was the Evelyn Wood version of a whole part of a body of work I do. What I really want to focus though on is my father. And as a way, so I really more want to talk less about the art I make versus how I came to make the art I make and the art I wish I made by way of talking about my father. But first, let me share just a brief excerpt of a project I did with my parents in, I think, 1999 called My Parents Read Dreams I've Had About Them. So watching this is very uncomfortable in a certain way, in a way that it wasn't when I first filmed it, which is I become very aware of a power dynamic that's at play here. It kind of reminds me of a hostage video, you know, like where someone is recording under duress a prepared text. And in a certain way, I think that was what was going on, because in their kind of like, you know, first generation Jewish parent way, I don't think they understood that they could say no. But the reason I'm showing this, one part of the reason I'm showing this is because I feel like the question of agency and power is so alive in the question of portraiture. And I found it was so especially activated by this particular show. So I'm thinking of like, there were so many photographs here. This is by Eugene von Breuschheim, forgive my pronunciations, where the ambivalence of the subject in relationship to being photographed is almost part of the work. There's something I can't place about it, but the power dynamic is part of what constructs the power of the work. And, you know, often it's in a gray zone here, you know, and here sometimes, you know, in certain images, there feels to be a type of collaboration. Other ones, it's less clear. And, you know, we certainly feel that in this work of the work of Miroslav Tiki, where these folks were completely unaware of being filmed and how or photographed, and how does that make us feel as we watch it? These Polaroids, I believe they were, taken off the screen by an anonymous artist, which I found so compelling. The question of agency even here, because like, okay, Barbara Streisand, bless her, is a willing participant in a performance that is being played at this time in technology, one time in real time. Yet, what does it mean to then extract this still from it? What does it say about the power? And I felt like that is partly what drew them to me. And it was this play between collaboration, the power dynamic that made me feel incredible push and pull between those works and the works where folks were filming themselves. I felt a type of relief where I perceive these works really differently by virtue of that question of agency being not evoked in the same way. And I actually thought one of the really effective things in the show, even this image, which is so disturbing, I was like, well, at least he's doing it to himself. But the play between, levels of agency, volition, participation, I think is one of the many things that gave this piece its power. But the other thing I want to talk about is just to be reductive, I make art in strong part because of time I would spend with my dad in a workshop he had in the basement. Like many Jewish children of the 70s, I was obsessed with magic. And my dad had a wood shop and he had this really clunky aesthetic, and we would make magic tricks together. We'd make magic tricks and carnival games for the Cub Scouts. And there was just something so beautifully wrong about his craftsmanship. This is like a kind of device I use to, well, anyway, I'll perform it sometime at part 2 of this. Nina, please join me for that. For a project I did, I rented a carnival box. It just reminded me of my dad. Really, and put these index cards.
Yes, to redistribution of wealth.
In it. And
but what about redistribution?
This is the part that comes closest to my dad's aesthetic, coming up right here. Having my
they're vulnerable gesture, showing some of your teeth
blower to operate. I also built a kind of vitrine, a spinning vitrine for the cards that were modeled after the magic tricks my dad and I used to make together. But it was too right, you know what I mean? But coming to the show, I fell in love with the work of Elizabeth Van Wy because she manages, and I want to understand it with you all, she manages to achieve that thing. This photograph is I am speechless apparently about this photograph, and I'm sure there's a lot of theory about it, but what makes this photograph irresistible? Or this one? Or this one? And, I find she, I believe, achieves this type of, I don't know the word, I use clunkiness, but that's really not the right word. It's a type of catching lightning in a bottle of offhandedness. And there are times when it doesn't quite work for me with her. And I'm spending time, maybe we can talk about it, Nina. I'm trying to understand why these don't quite work, or there are ones that I know don't work, like this. I think it has something to do with the ratio of intention to outcome. I'm not sure. I also wanted to talk, before I wrap it up, about like my dad. I have always been inspired by his, he was a pack rat. I don't know if that's if there's like a nicer way to put it these days, but he was also, so I kept this bulletin board, actually it's several bulletin boards of his, because it's such a snapshot of his mind, but he was also, I think like a lot of pack rats, deeply ordered. And, this ordering system, well, anyhow, I noticed, I was going through photographs of his apartment, and I took some photographs before we left, before we gave up the apartment, and I realized, oh, they almost achieved that. And this is one of them. This one is not as good, and I wonder if it's just as simple as the cropping being better, but I think they're both pretty good. So I just wanted to just briefly reference the work of Johann Gertzmann for this way that he creates a system of structuring stuff that, on the one hand, I sense that it has a strong internal logic, and it is visually, for me, irresistible. But it also has a kind of, I don't know, there's something obscure about what's driving it. There is a type of urgency that's driving it, as with my dad's need to keep, a box full of calculators. I mean, how many calculators do you need? But there's also a structure in there. So I don't know, I don't have any insight into it beyond, I don't understand it in a way that I find, that's often what you want in art. And I also feel a connection somehow to some of Nina's work. Anyhow, I'm gonna leave it at that. Hello.
Hello. Welcome back.
Yay.
Well, thank you both. That was amazing. I think fascinating, fantastic. That's what I was putting in the chat. At this point, we want to turn to allow you to speak together. That you gave us so much to think about.
I took a lot of notes.
Oh, me too, me too. Maybe we just hold up the notes to the
yeah, that's right.
both of us.
Yeah, your handwriting is much more interesting than mine.
Or whatever.
But there's one question in the chat which is sort of like one of my notes. And so can we start? Maybe we could start with this question. Sure. So I have been asked a lot of times about the kind of, like, I showed you the seatbelt buckle portrait, spy portrait. I didn't show you the even more invasive thing that I've been doing for a long time, where I take pictures of the person next to me when they fall asleep on the plane, because I really find that a beautiful, poignant moment, that there's this kind of stranger sleeping next to you. And I mean, I'm that person for my seatmate as well when I fall asleep. But there is something also, I realize, intrusive and kind of a little creepy about that. And no, I do not ask for the person's permission. And I've always felt a kind of uneasiness about that, which is maybe why I didn't put in the slideshow today. But Neil, you too must have, with the people coming out of the subway or the people at the salad bar. I mean, how do you contend with that? Or how do you, I guess, pragmatically, how do you contend with it? Are you getting release forms? Or conceptually, ethically, how do you contend with it?
It's such a great question. I really want to hear it in relationship to your work. So let's boomerang that back. But I once was discussing this with a Buddhist priest. I was doing a presentation at a Zen center, as one will, and she said, what's your intention? And first of all, by the way, I don't know if this, this provides absolution, but I found that to be a really helpful way to kind of measure the question of this question. So, when I'm videotaping people coming out of the subway trying to orient themselves, for me, that they are mirrors, they are, surrogates. It's not, oh, look at that freak. It's like, we all are. This is all of us. Now, of course, there's privilege that goes into my deciding who we all are. But that has guided. And it's interesting that one work that I did where I really felt uncomfortable was, I did a project called The Gay Couples of Whole Foods, where I photographed couples coming out of Whole Foods, gay people I presume to be gay couples, without their permission. I did get releases from almost all of them, or many of them. But that was the only project in my 25 years making work with people on the street where someone asked, to get their work pulled out of the show when they saw it somewhere. And I think that has to do with my intention there is is more complicated. Like, it's true, the project emerged when I was with my husband, Jeff, in Whole Foods and thinking like, I hate how I feel such corporate approval for our gay coupleness. Like now, you know, it felt so on brand, like, oh, the gay couple getting the goji berries, let's get, you know, but it's darker than that too. So where does that, and I'm all over the map about permission.
But Neil, so the person who wanted it pulled, was that because they felt sort of implicated in that like lifestyle, kind of a finger point at the lifestyle, bougie lifestyle thing?
This is a whole other question.
Okay.
That person, without going into too much detail, it was the spouse of the head of a big magazine, who has a huge Instagram presence. I'm not saying a huge following. Sorry, that's me being catty, but who spends a lot of time presenting how he and they live in the world via social media. And I think it didn't work with that.
Interesting.
It was part of it. I mean, I'm being very uncharitable because my feelings were hurt, but I did take the piece out immediately.
Yeah.
So yeah, but how does
So yeah, I mean, I'm thinking through your Buddhist advice. I guess I would say my intention with the sleeping people is to show something which I think is a positive kind of, what's the word I want here? Damn, it's a really strange thing to articulate this. It's one of the most complicated things I've made that as you can tell, I'm never sure how to talk about. There's tenderness, I feel, in this moment between me and the sleeping person, and a kind of tenderness that I want to bring into what can often feel like a very, very, I think being on a plane can be a very alienating experience. You're packed in there, you've paid for your seat. People used to talk to each other on planes. Nowadays, it's more like, I paid for the space, you paid for yours, don't say anything to me. Like it's become, I think, a very, like the sociality of it is very shut down now compared to maybe how it was a few decades ago. So I guess in that there's a kind of warmth or tenderness or something to that moment of sleeping. I guess I want to include these pictures because I think it brings back that, or says that the potential for that, for some kind of human connection isn't entirely missing even there. Like there's a kind of even there to that moment that there is in my one can even make art even there to the project at large. So that too is a bit convoluted. If anyone ever came to me and said, that's me, take me out, of course I would. I guess the other thing I'll say to sort of cover my butt is that the people are really rarely recognizable. Like I think it would be hard to sort of say, that's that person. They're not shown frontally. Often they're kind of like under a blanket or something. So I sort of live with it uneasily. The piece that in my life I've made that is the most uncomfortable is actually, interestingly, an audio work where there is no visual of the person. But this piece was made in the mid-90s, in my first few years in New York. It's called Wanted. And it was back in the days when one would find an apartment by putting an ad in the Village Voice and reading the Village Voice, and back in the days when one would get the first copy that came out, which was at that Astor Place newsstand, and you'd go and like quickly like call a bunch of numbers. I collaborated on this piece with my friend Julia Meltzer, and what we did is we wrote an ad that said, for rent, 6 by 9 by 7 feet, $200 a month, West Village, you know, small, charming, something apartment. And then set up an answering machine and waited to see who would call. And what people didn't know is that 6 by 9 by 7 feet is the size of a standard American jail cell. So we were trying to sort of test the limits of like what absurdly small amounts of real estate people in New York City were willing to rent and pay for at that time, sort of measured up against a terribly small space that is terribly small for all kinds of other reasons. And people called and they were never identified by name. We took that stuff out, but we played the calls back into a room that had been built to be the same size. And it was interesting and intensely uncomfortable. You know, everyone who called was not going to get a call back. There were comments sometimes like, isn't that unfair? And yes, in a sense, it was unfair. I don't know that anyone was really damaged by what we did, but it had a kind of tension that I think, you know, it's weird as an artist, sometimes you make something and it's only once you put it in the world that you go, oh shit, you know, like I didn't, you know, it's then when you have your moment of reckoning. And I guess we've sort of been thinking about that piece ever since then. And if it was sort of like on the right side of the line. So anyway, that's long-winded, but just to say that even without a visual element, one can represent people or misrepresent people and be up against these kinds of questions. So, yeah.
I super hear that. That actually connects to a question I want to ask you, which has something to do, as I was watching your presentation and thinking about it in relationship to the work in the show, is you often create these surrogate systems. That word came to mind as I was talking about, you know, the person who made the dolls, but so you create portraits of people, let's say, well, I don't know if they're portraits of people. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You create what I think of as portraits by kind of these combinations of books, for instance. Or, you know, I'm thinking about a project you did where you kind of trace brands, a lineage of brands.
Yes.
I'm also thinking of the very first piece of yours I saw, we just talked about it before, 1997, where you had dissected a map. I can't remember what it was a map of, maybe of the United States, it was just the roads.
That's
and
right.
I feel like what you had done, and maybe this isn't the same project or process that I'm talking about, is you had kind of created a surrogate, or you had embodied something that is abstract, which is a nation or a road system, and given it kind of concrete form. So I'd love to hear more about how that kind of, those operations live in your work.
Because it's so funny, that's the first piece you ever saw. That's, I have not known this until now. Yeah, I have for a long time been really interested in portraits that don't look like portraits, or things that act like portraits that aren't images of people. One of the works in that show that Neil mentioned was back in the 90s again, there was a lot of audio tape that was flying around on the streets of New York City. I think people were sort of just on the cusp of giving up the Walkman. But, you know, at that time, tapes would break, they'd break in the car stereo, they'd break in your like portable tape deck, and people would sort of like pull out all the spaghetti of audio tape and it would sort of end up in a tree or tangled around a weed. And my first year in New York City, as I was trying to kind of find my bearings generally as a misplaced Californian who was really lost and confused there, I was collecting this stuff and taking it back to my studio and wiping it with water to get rid of who knows what had been on it, and then restoring it and making it playable. And I was making these audio portraits of New York in a way by noting where I had found the tape and sort of then figuring out what was on it and trying to sort of see whether like it would describe neighborhoods, people, demographics, the city at large. It was sort of a sonic portrait of New York in a way. So that's a logic that I think I've brought to other projects too. The project that you mentioned, Neil, with books involves, it's a very long, it's the longest running project that I make called Sorted Books. It started in '93, and it involves working with a collection of books, could be somebody's personal library or more of a sort of public book collection. But I look at titles on the shelves and then organize books into stacks so that you can read the titles like a phrase in order. I've done many of these over the years. For this upcoming show in May in New York, I've actually just finished doing a new book sorting of Isamu Noguchi's books on invitation by the Noguchi Museum. And that was really interesting to see, to do. But that too doesn't look like a portrait, but kind of acts like a portrait. And I had a third example that now I've spaced out. But yeah, I think there are, I mean, you too, though, Neil, like there are many things where a collection becomes a description of a thing, like the sort of multiples that then aggregate. I feel like that is something we have in common, our kind of collecting and sorting and the system that one then comes up with, the sort of logic behind the taxonomizing. And, you know, when I look at work, like, again, back to this exhibition, at the museum, but there are people where I found myself looking for that. It's like, by what criteria? And maybe, you know, to your I'm searching for her name, Elizabeth Van Wijn,
Yeah.
yeah, like that I thought about with her work, like which of these pictures, you know, these made the cut, or what do they have in common? But there was something really fascinating about that for me too. I'm so glad you talked about her today.
Yeah. There was someone else in the show who also did that. It's not helpful for me to say that, but who would create these collections. He was an original cut of mine, but he would take collections of things like of electrical boxes and then just write text around them, or it would be a couple of rocks on a table. And
we have all kinds of chat questions.
Yeah, I find
we do. I think there's so many threads here, and for an exhibition that you're responding to with 40 artists, I can only imagine. So we'll jump into the Q&A now, and I can start to read some of the ones that we've received here. And I love this question, Nina. This is directed towards you, but I think it's also relevant to your practice, Neil. Have you made rules for seat assignment about secrecy visibility?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit what I had in mind when I asked Neil that first question. I mean, my rules are less about that and more about the kind of methodology of what am I allowed to use and how much am I allowed to prepare. And you know, in so many ways, it's mostly about, I can't make it too easy. Like, I'm not allowed to go, I decided long ago, I can't go all James Bond on this and like pack a bag with amazing little tools, or, you know, things that become, you know, I thought early on, like maybe I should design kind of things that are part of my kit, but decided that's the wrong approach to this. It has to be, if anything, and maybe here I'll come back to sort of, you use the phrase magic tricks, Neil, and I feel like maybe the pictures I feel most satisfied with perform a kind of magic trick, in that there's a way you can tell this is a person in a bathroom with a paper towel on her head, but at the same time, you're also seeing a Flemish painting. So there's a kind of having your cake and eating it too, that over years of watching people respond to those photos, I've been sort of noticing that seems to be maybe what's in it for a lot of people, is that kind of the way one thing ghosts the other. And yeah, so I love seeing those pictures, Neil, of the magic tricks, and it also made me think about the sort of joy of making aspect to doing that with your dad. And I mean, I love that you also love his way of making mediocrely, if that's a word, right? So I guess I wanted to ping pong it back to you, if that kind of magic trick, if you feel like in your work you've imported lessons from that. Somehow.
Well, it's so interesting that you said, you know, you didn't want to make it too easy for yourself. I mean, I find ways to make everything hard for myself, but I would never, I'd love to find a way to make it easy for myself. You know what I mean? So like my questions about doing things in public is less about like, you know, hiding it, and more like what's going to achieve getting the shot. And there's a Schrodinger, I think, thing where it's like the thing observed, you know, is affected by being observed. But I don't know. I think I have a different relationship to the joy of making. You seem like there are certain artists, like I think of you, Kiki Smith, there are a couple of people who are just, you know, it's always happening. And I think it actually connects interestingly to something you said about like time that doesn't, quote unquote, doesn't matter. For me, I don't find it unpleasurable to make things, but neither do I find it pleasurable to make things. I found working with my dad, I find certain things desperately unpleasurable, like writing. I used to write a lot, and now I don't because, well, for a long time I haven't, just because I realized I'm going to die one day, and I don't want to spend so much time doing this thing I don't like doing, even if I like what comes out at the end. So I don't know, I have a different relationship to that, but there is a relationship to play at its origin. I think that's partly why I hold on to my dad with that. And you know, I like what you were saying about the having the cake and eating it of the Flemish, you know, it's a person with a you know, toilet cover on their collar, but also it's a Flemish painting. I feel like I'm trying to go for that on an emotional, like I'm drawn on an emotional level in that I am drawn, as I said earlier, to images or moments that have a kind of neutrality, for lack of a better word. People opening their gates. You could feel a bunch of different ways about it. Or things that really are nothing. Like so many of my projects, maybe why they're not so joyful is because they're kind of about nothing, like people emerging from the subway and looking a couple of different ways. It was so painful to edit, not painful is melodramatic. It was a real drag to edit that piece because it kept falling apart. It was like, it didn't cohere because it was about nothing. So it took finding some tricks around, you know, finding a rhythm in how they walked up the stairs.
I think of that piece as a moment where nothing becomes something. And I would say I feel that way about a lot of your work. It's like the nothing of not knowing where you are becomes the something of recognition, of orientation, you know? And I think that's what you do so brilliantly, actually. It sort of just dawns on me that this is one of the things I love about how you work. That something about the way you kind of conglomerate the thing or collect enough instances that suddenly we see something else through it. That I mean, and I think I understand the attraction to working that way. I feel like I do my version of that too. Yeah. And by the way, I don't always have fun when I'm making art. Sometimes, I mean, back to the exhibition for a second, but I think sometimes I feel a kind of jealousy of these artists who, I mean, you know, I wrote from the introduction to the catalog, there's sort of a description of this group of artists as people who are, quote, outside the art world and conventional art circuits. And it's like, ugh, I mean, sometimes I really wish I was outside conventional art. There's sort of pressures from that can be so deadening. And you know, perhaps this, what's that?
Sorry to interrupt, but COVID is sure helping with that.
Oh, for sure, yeah. But I think that and perhaps this is me being kind of romantic in a silly way, but there's just, sometimes I think it's hard to give oneself permission to just sort of do that, like make for the sake of making things, because there's got to be a reason, because this is my profession, because I'm an artist, and this, all of that begins.
Yeah.
So.
See, for me, the challenge is to do nothing and experience that as part of your making. Like, so that's why I thought it was so, like, for me, the challenge, and I think for both of us, the difference leads to our work. It's both the right choice, but for me, the challenge in the airplane is to just be in the airplane and, you know, take in that and not make something, or because that seems to be where the art tends to emerge from, like the act of doing nothing in these moments that you talked about. So like what you do is, I love, you use the expression like time that doesn't matter. Like, and I think we're both focused in it, and you kind of, that becomes kind of like your studio time that doesn't matter. And maybe in the same way it does for me too, but it's not productive in the moment. It's not, it has more to do with, well, or maybe it's just a ratio of a certain type of labor to a certain type of contemplation. I'm not sure.
People seem to want us to talk about our parents and making work with our parents, because we've both done that. I
know, and we actually have a project. I think I briefly mentioned to this. I don't know if you remember. You did a project with that speech coach, Accent Elimination.
Yes.
And did I mention to you that I did a project with him?
No, the same guy?
The same guy who you really liked him and I really didn't like him.
Oh my God, how interesting.
So
yeah.
Cantor can't talk about him. But for a while, I found I had a psychologist friend who used the expression narcissistic oral rage while we were talking. This is in the mid-90s. Okay. And I was like, she was talking about vegetarianism and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I want to hear people from all over the world saying narcissistic oral rage of the English speaking world. Yeah. So I got this guy to just come and say narcissistic oral rage, like someone from this part of Ohio, this part of, you know, London, you know, it got super regional. And he, I think, felt like, what the hell am I doing here? Which of course is always a good question to ask. But your project was so beautiful. Would you describe it for?
Sure. I mean,
it involved your parents. This did not involve my parents.
My parents agreed. And again, like, there's a bit of a hostage element thing, perhaps, to this. They were willing hostages to come to New York for a couple weeks to work with an accent coach in order to have, okay, so I should back up and say, each of my parents speak with accents that are very complicated because they are the conglomerations and accumulations of having been born in places within larger language minorities, within larger places, and then having moved and married each other. And it's just this completely kind of, you know, confusing mix of things, then people can't place it when they hear them speak. They're very fluent English, but they've been asked about their accents their entire life. And I've been witness to this conversation my entire life, and I cannot imitate their accents. And this was a sort of a maddening, irritating thing. I just ended up sounding like Natasha from Rocky and Bullwinkle, you know, like bad spy accent. So I decided to do a project with them, and they agreed to work with this accent coach who does a thing called accent elimination, which was a very intriguing term. It sounded kind of disturbingly violent and a bit of concern on my part about what kind of erasure is going on here. He was very careful to say to us, you know, this is not about taking some, you know, it's not about not being proud of your heritage. It's about sort of, you know, clear communication and so on. So my parents each wrote a script. The script was as if they were speaking to a stranger at a party who gets curious about where they come from. And then what we do in the piece is we each try to perform the script, me and my dad, and then me and my mom, in each other's accents, which our coach is trying to help us to learn how to do. I'm also showing this piece in the May show at Pace in case anyone is interested in seeing it. And, you know, it's wildly confusing. Like, it's completely unattainable. It's, you know, what we managed to do is to sort of hear where we're headed, but we hardly get there in any kind of perfect way. Along the way, though, and, you know, maybe this is something that I do find really interesting about making art, is the stuff that happens along the way. But we discovered we don't pronounce our family name the same way. We have 3 different ways of pronouncing our surname. And then it becomes a question of kind of who's right. Like, is my dad right? Because he's the real Armenian. You know, my mom has been married to this name for a long time. Maybe she gets to have her version of it. You know, maybe I get to have my version of it because I've also had to grow up spelling it and explaining where it's from and all these things. So it was for me a piece about, you know, about the American fantasies around assimilation and melting pot and identity, and also the kind of odd, interesting excesses of language, like, and also even on a really basic level, like what emerges from your body, like this sonic thing, which is so hard to control. Like, it's sort of from you physically, but then it becomes this kind of amorphous thing. And there's something about working with one's voice that is so psychological every time I've tried to do it. And I was thinking about inheritance. I was thinking about the accent as an heirloom I can never have, you know, I can never grasp. And it's sort of contained in my parents' bodies, which I have such direct evidence of in, like, you know, my hands look like my mom's and so does my nose and these kinds of things. But the accent was in this other space. So that's a kind of short summary, but, you know, I have shown your work
to my parents, filming my parents, which is, you know, I did a project called The Oys of My Father after he died, which
oh my God, I don't know this one.
Yeah, I basically, I did it a while after he died, and I was just trying, you know, Oy is kind of like, you know, the proverbial, it can be exasperation, it can be like relief, it can be exhaustion, impatience. So I think I spent 5 minutes with the camera on, just trying to imagine my dad saying "oi" and just trying to reproduce it for the camera in the different ways. And it was a deep internal journey, because it's like, what is it like to remember someone, first of all, and then kind of like remembering specific instances. Like, I know "oi" was something that accompanied sitting down in the chair, you know what I mean?
Right.
Or being impatient with how I had, you know, used a Phillips head screwdriver when I should have used blah, 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 you know what I mean? Allen wrench, that's not a good example. So,
when did you make that piece?
He died in 2007, so sometime after that, 2000.
Like soon after.
11-ish.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's an amazing kind of seance channeling too.
Yeah.
I
mean,
I really want to see it.
Well, talking about portraiture, I mean, I saw the comedian, the genius comedian Jacqueline Novak, and I was talking about whenever she sees a photograph, a family photograph, she thinks of old, people who are, old photographs. She says, everyone looks kind of stupid. And her point is, they are now dead, but in the photograph, they didn't know that they don't know that they're dead now.
Right.
And so she says, whenever she takes a photograph, she tries to put an expression on, like, to the,
I know, right?
I know I may be dead when you look at this. And that, more than any theoretical text, forget like Roland Barthes or Susan Sontag,
right?
The way I think about photography. But it's relevant in my case with filming my parents who are now dead. I mean, I think I just watched the Mary Tyler Moore show last night, and you know how they have the little kitten at the end who goes meow instead of the lion. I was like, that kitten's dead.
Here in Berlin, there is quite an amazing, fascinating urban landscape of cemeteries that are very integrated into the city. Isn't
that just the whole city, or no? Sorry.
I mean, it is amazing.
I was outsourced. Sorry.
Yeah. It was. It's a very green city, and it's full of some of those green spaces are cemeteries, and you kind of end up wandering in them all the time. And I have been this feels so kind of fraught and disrespectful, but I constantly take pictures of tombstones because I'm fascinated by the design. I'm fascinated by the epitaphs. It's good German practice. But I'm always looking for the knowing ones, like the ones that are kind of like, like just like you're saying about these photos. And I think my favorite one to date, and I just don't know how to interpret this, is a professor who's buried in a cemetery in Prenzlauer Berg on the former East. And it's one of these tombstones that says like Herr Doctor, Professor, Herr, like a lot of titles preceding the name. But then the thing on the tombstone, if I translate it sloppily into English, basically says, a hypothesis is just a hypothesis. And I've been thinking about this for months. Like, what does that mean? Like, I mean, one hypothesis, I don't know where to go with it, but it feels like the guy had asked for that. Like he planned that, and he wanted to leave people in this kind of head scratch, like, forever. Or I don't know, maybe it's an insider joke with his family and they all know what it means, but I'm constantly looking for those sort of, posthumous moments of it's Thomas Machinsky's finger. It's like, I know, it kind of is that.
I would like my tombstone to say, but enough about me. I'm sure someone's done that already. Also, at the cemetery where my parents are buried, and a lot of my family, right next to one of my relatives is a tombstone that has a typo in it.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what it is.
Well, I was going to say what word. Maybe my last comment, because I think we're slowly, we are. Right?
We've got about a minute left. The time really flew
I'll just
by.
share one thing, which is that someone just sent me a picture of a tombstone in Sweden, and it is a big boulder. And the boulder, oh my God, the person who is buried under this boulder is the stonemason who was killed by that boulder.
Oh, wow.
Fell on him. And it says on the tombstone on the boulder, this rock killed this guy. And it's just one of the strangest kind of circular things that I think I've ever come across. But that one's one of my prizes in the collection so far. Thank you, Simon, who sent it to me.
That's like Robert Morris's box with the sound of its own making.
That's right.
But
only better.
Right. Hey, thank you. Hello.
One of the questions that I had, I was going to ask what your collections look like personally, because of course our show is largely coming from a private collection. It's 2:15 though, so our time is up, and I'm sad this time really flew by. The conversation was transporting and amazing and just so much fun. I want to close with some housekeeping things. We had a question, Nina. Your show is at Pace Gallery.
Yes, the show, thank you for asking.
Oh, exciting, Nina.
It's at Pace. May 13th is the opening. Yeah, and it's kind of a combination of a few really big older projects, big size-wise, but also things that I've sort of been adding to over the last decades, and then a couple of new things too. But yeah, there's going to be a lot there, and it's my first sort of larger solo show with them, so I'm excited about that.
Well, I imagine that all of us who are in New York, around New York, will be excited to see that and visit in person. We've also just put in the chat the link for Neil's piece. This is online with the New York Times. It's fabulous. It's poignant. It's what's you know, will really, really resonate, I think. And we just want to thank you again. This was so wonderful to see this work through your eyes, just really transforming and just so fun. So I think we had a lot of interest, comments throughout. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We hope you'll join us again for other programs. We have another one on April 1st that's on the gaze. And I think exactly what you both were bringing up around consent and agency, we'll be exploring that more. And I think, I hope that our panelists will also listen to your conversation and hear your thoughts.
Persephone, how much longer is the show up at the museum?
That's a great, it is on view until June. June.
I just want to put in a plug for go see it, because I feel so lucky to have gotten to do this with you guys, but it's just also like there is so much wonderful stuff to see. So so go.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to put in the chat as well the link for our website where you can sign up and book your tickets for free to see it. It's fabulous. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your Thursdays.
Thank you for being there.
Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.